episode of the iXi GamePod, which you may notice it says iXi GamePod episode 2. That's because the iXi GamePod has been rebranded from the iXi Clubcast. We decided we wanted to keep that name. We wanted to drop that maybe into something in the future you might see. You know, kind of leave that to be maybe a little bit more general, something along those lines. This is going to be a little bit more focused on games and just kind of entertainment maybe from that aspect too. But we're going to still kind of keep somewhat of that structure. The big change is that while we're still going to keep the what are you playing sections and the news sections, we're also going to have a general topic of the week, topic of the episode. For this particular episode, we're going to be talking about expectations, and we're also going to be talking about influence.
Right.
So we're going to be having those two things brought under one umbrella, perhaps, that we'll get into a little bit later. And from there, let's just kick it off. So let's start it.
Before we get into what we're playing, just to get it out, I'm FUNKNOWN, just in case because we sure some of you are probably listening to our Day After Dead podcast, which covers everything from The Walking Dead to Fear the Walking Dead.
Right.
So if you hear me, you're familiar with me as FUNKNOWN, and who was just talking was Asadasa.
Yep, that's me. That's what we got going on over here. And I really love the plug right there for the Walking Dead podcast. You know, there's also some of our
You like that, right?
brilliant other iXi Club content that you can go
I really liked this past discussion. It was interesting this week.
It was good. I think it was very good. It was an interesting episode, too.
Always something exciting going on in the dad cast.
That's what it is, man. You know, you might think about it, you know, from these aspects. You might be like, oh, Walking Dead, whatever. But, you know, just it's something because, you know, it's just always something interesting being brought up, I think, just by the topics that we have, which is also kind of why we focused on being able to rebrand this in a sort of way that actually focuses a little bit more on topics.
Yeah.
Gives a little bit more focus, makes things a little bit more interesting. You know, there's not a lot of things that are talking about topics in this particular general way, so I think it might be a little bit more interesting to bring some sort of like academia to, you know, this area and just kind of see where things go. But again, explore the iXi Club. We're going to front load it with all the plugs. Get in there, look at the LPs we got, look at some of the other videos we have, check out some of the other podcasts. We are on iTunes. You know, but don't get scared once you see it. This says GamePod episode 2. You've already listened to episode 1 if you listen to the iXi Clubcast.
Right.
All right.
So, without further ado, what was you've been playing Quantum Break recently, right?
I have. I actually finished it a couple days ago. It took me a little longer because it's been kind of a busy week.
Yeah.
But I ran through it. And, you know, just to give some of the general impressions.
Yeah, just nothing too in detail yet.
Dive right into it. You know, I did like it overall. But, you know, did you play or do you remember the order 1886 or 1866?
1886, yeah.
1886. Did you play that? Or?
I didn't play it, no, but I followed it. Yeah.
Right.
So, what
it kind of seems like the Xbox One's version of that game. Like, it was a lull, and I'd say the order was like way shorter, and it was a little bit less actual gameplay involved. I would say that like Quantum Break's still a little bit more in depth, but it's a game that I think like, you know, I haven't really been following too much in terms of actual like sell through and whatnot. But in regards to the actual game of itself, it hits in a time period where right now there really isn't too much else to really be playing.
Right.
You know.
Well, how'd you feel about the gameplay though, as compared to Order 1886? That's an interesting comparison that you brought up.
Right. Exactly. You know, there's actual gameplay.
that's
you know,
all right.
Is the thing, right? Like, his game 1886 was more of like an actual interactive movie.
So you feel Quantum Break was more about its presentation and all that, more so than the actual game element, or?
So there's like an actual like pretty decent time travel story if you're into that sort of thing. Which I am. I love that sort of thing. I think that's always very interesting.
It seems interesting, yeah, for sure.
Definitely. But in comparison to like your normal, just like dial it back a little bit. Let's say what it is. It's more or less a third-person shooter.
Right.
So in your normal cover-based third-person shooter, the way you're kind of handling this game is you are going into cover and then you are shooting. In this game, you have a number of time powers, and by time powers, I mean you have a bunch of powers that have the word time addended to it. So you have a time shield, you can do a time dash, you have a time burst, and what you're basically doing is, for let's say the shield, is you're putting yourself in like a big bubble, and if you get shot at, then you can then not get hit because you're kind of enclosing yourself in time is what's supposed to be happening. Or when you're doing the time burst, you get like a little sort of like focused area that you can kind of put onto an enemy, and then you can blow that up. You can also stop time on certain peoples, like you can do like a AoE, like area of effect type thing. And from there, you can actually then like shoot that thing a bunch of times.
That's interesting. So all the mechanics play into each other, and you can mix and match different powers.
Right.
So it seems like you can tackle this sandbox from multiple ways.
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of. It gets somewhat repetitive, to be honest. And the enemies themselves aren't too varied. So for a very large majority of the game, you're just fighting like dudes. And dudes that once like, so there's a lot of stuff going on with the game. So there's these things called stutters, and that's basically like time breaking. So even
Is that the situation with the bridge that they marketed?
Right.
Okay. Yes.
So just to even talk about what the game even is, actually, to kind of even dial it back further, let's keep backpedaling until we actually get.
It's all one big bubble.
It's true, right? Like it's all like a time bubble, right? But it's a time travel story, and more or less what's going on is that time has fractured. So in some of the marketing and whatnot that you might have seen at this point, and just like what they've kind of put out there in terms of what the game is, so this isn't really spoilers or anything, but you have one guy and his brother was doing all sorts of time experiments. There's also a friend of theirs, and some time machines have been built, and the ramifications of these time machines in regard to how that has an effect on time. So something occurs, one of these time machines is used, and all of a sudden you start getting these fractures in time, and there's these stutters that all of a sudden time stops. Certain people have not affected, and there's some things that kind of the story then gets into at that point. But for the most part, when you're playing the game, you're just fighting normal people. If stutters occur, they stop, and it's pretty interesting. You can go up to them and you can like steal their guns. So like they have the guns and they're aiming it at you. You can walk up to them and you can take them.
Do the enemies have different kinds of guns or different ways to attack you?
You are just fighting dudes with guns, and then it gets it is a 5-act structure. And once you're into like maybe say the second act or whatever, you start seeing that there are guys that have time guns that are able to also fight in these fractures. Okay. So you are, for the most part, in the beginning of the game, fighting these people, and you're teleporting all around, and you're being like some sort of time god, and you're just going around doing all destruction, stopping them in place, shooting bullets and blowing it up, and you're doing all this crazy stuff. But then eventually you find people that are also able to teleport. Their powers never get so crazy like yours are. You always have more options, but they have more movement speed. There are the generic enemies that you need to go behind to shoot because they have their weak point on the back. But they have heavies, more or less they're just heavies. But you do get some variance in terms of the actual enemies that you receive. But the problem kind of gets to a point where even though you have, I want to say, 6 powers, you gain them through time, like as you progress through the game. But even though you have 6 powers, it never gets to the point where you need to utilize them all the way.
You can only use a handful of them and be all right.
Right.
Well, to talk about the enemies for a second, you brought up how they're not very diverse in their approach or attacks or whatnot. That's actually a complaint I had with The Division,
right?
Where it felt like you were fighting the same kind of enemy throughout the whole game, and that game at its core is supposed to be a game you put tons of hours into, and their loot system wasn't too attractive, but that's another issue. But more on the enemy thing, like if the enemies more if the sandbox was more diversified in all aspects of it, then I think that game would have stuck longer with me.
Definitely.
But I don't know. I made it to like level 26, and my friends made it to max level, and they're playing in the dark zone right now. But I just can't really find myself to go back to it.
I agree.
So to bring it back to Quantum Break, how do you feel with its replay? Do you feel are you gonna go back to it, or?
I think Division at least has more just by virtue of being a massively like
the design of it, right?
Yeah, like the online aspects of it, and the actual like I agree with you on the bullet sponge. I think the Division characters are way more like bigger bullet sponges in comparison to the characters in Quantum Break, but they still kind of soak up the bullets. You run into a situation with this game where, like I said, it's a 5-act structure. So after each act, you get a 22-minute long TV episode. And so at the end of each act, you get like a split, like a branch split, and you get to make one of two decisions. And then after that, you get to watch a 22-minute long episode. And then
I heard they weren't too bad, but they weren't. I heard they were more on the side of bad, but they weren't as bad as expected.
They're not great.
Right.
And I would say that they're not like so bad they become good, because I like a lot of like bad movies, you know what I mean? Like
bad entertainment,
exactly.
Your guilty pleasures.
Yeah, like I'm super down for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But what's more kind of like where this TV show kind of fails at is, at least for other TV shows, I can never say like, hey man, why don't you just watch these 4 episodes? They're good. Because on their own, they're nothing. They mean absolutely nothing. They only mean anything within context of
what's going on
the game. So like on their own, they don't stand. There's no standalone aspect to them. Mm-hmm. They don't focus on like any of the main characters. So like you only see the character you play as once. Not to say none of the main characters are involved. There are some named characters, and one of like the big. It's a lot of stuff from the perspective of the big bad. So you kind of get to see where he's at, but like for the most part, a lot of it seems very tangential. Like it's really all tertiary. It never really seems to be like of anything of the most importance. And when you're sitting there and you're watching it for 22 minutes, that can be a pretty big time sink, because that's about an hour and a half at least that you've kind of wasted now at that point not playing a game. Yeah. It depends, I guess, on how you play it, because like Alan Wake, I think, had a similar structure in regards to it didn't have like a video or like a TV component, but you would play the game, and then it ended on episode 1. Then you would do episode 2. So like the game itself.
They have
is still,
journals and notes and stuff to find. Yeah.
This game has, so you can find, they call intel objects and narrative objects. So you can find things that like are notes, emails, just stuff to kind of world build. And then the intel objects, if I remember correctly, are information about like specific characters that also have an effect on the TV show. But by the effect that they have in a TV show, it's like you see like a thing in a corner that kind of like is like a little yellow symbol that spins, and then it's like you get an extra 2 seconds added on. Like it never added anything important or vital or critical or interesting. It was always like, if you had skipped this, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, I don't think.
So does in the end, do you feel the TV show ultimately negatively impacts the experience, or if a sequel were to come out, would you like for them to continue with that design? Right.
So that's actually a pretty good question, I think, because the game in and of itself really lends itself very highly to a sequel. Again, every game is a franchise, but I would say in a future one, I would probably not want there to be the TV stuff. I think the TV stuff is really born out of the fact that, like, originally this one,
the original idea is how they wanted to have it as a standalone show,
right?
That ties into the game.
Back when they had like a TV division at Microsoft and whatever, they never came out with anything for.
Nah, they closed that.
Yeah. It was supposed to be that Halo. What else were they supposed to have a show for?
Actually, I think although the Halo live action show by Spielberg, I believe, I don't know if there's any updates on that, but apparently still supposed to happen. But yeah, it was supposed to be down the pipeline with that stuff. They had a couple things planned apparently, but
they made a pretty big deal out of it at E3 when they announced it.
Nothing came to fruition, really.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But in the end, though, then would you recommend this game to someone? Would you recommend it maybe if they like Alan Wake? Maybe how about the newcomers?
I think if you like Alan Wake, I think it would be a pretty good choice for you to play. But I also feel like it's one of those situations, kind of like I said before with The Order, where right now there's kind of a lull in games, so you might be a little bit more like willing to like, oh man, I really want to play something, so you might jump onto it. But the truth of the matter is I can very easily see this game a month from now being $30, $40, and it might be a little bit more attractive at that price. It's not that it's a bad package, I don't think. I don't think it was a bad game necessarily, but I don't think it was really great. I think it was just merely good. I don't really want to say that it was aggressively mediocre, but it was pretty
aggressively mediocre.
Right, you know what I mean?
So it sounds like definitely something, if you're interested, check it out, but nothing right now that you need, unless you want to be part of the zeitgeist.
Exactly. It's really kind of that situation.
You can probably hold off on it then, huh?
I'll say again, the time travel story in of itself is pretty interesting. Like, it was really well done, I think, and it has a lot of like interesting ramifications that kind of are built from that. But more again, the interesting aspects of it, I think, could have been a little bit more well explored. And I do think, though, that again, the sequel hooks that you get at the end kind of are detrimental to the overall feeling you'll have in the game. It's so tight otherwise in regards to the story, which is a tough thing to do really with time travel. Time travel can get fucking crazy,
Yeah.
you
Just look at X-Men storyline right now.
Right.
They basically, a spoiler alert if you haven't seen Days of Future Past, but they pretty much retcon the shittiest X-Men movie in my opinion, which was The Last Stand,
Yeah.
X-Men 3.
Yeah.
Which I thought, I guess there was some controversy with that. I was shocked to see people didn't actually like that.
Me too.
But I loved that.
people
I
were
loved
more
how
down
they
for
handled
that.
that movie.
Yeah.
So
Which May 20th, May 6th.
I don't know. I've just been avoiding everything with that movie.
Yeah.
You remember in the theaters we talked over it, so we wouldn't be spoiled.
Yep.
If spoilers are serious though,
It's true. You gotta stay away from 'em.
Yeah.
It helps. But yeah, like it's so hard to write, and they keep it so tight, and then at the end it's like, well, I guess another aspect to think about it is really just that, like, when you fit, and that's what I think makes the TV show so disappointing, is because at the end of the day they're not really doing any interesting stuff in regards to the overall story, or to like it being time travel aspected stuff. So there's really no, if I were to say like what would I rather have an hour and a half of, would I rather have an hour and a half of the TV show, would I rather have an hour and a half of like time shenanigans and like more of like those things occurring, I think that would be something I would way be more interested in. So I'd like to see more of that. I think if you like Alan Wake, you'd probably like this. I think if you like Max Payne, you might be a little less invested in this.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think to also bring up too is, did you play Alan Wake?
Yes.
Was it Night Springs, the TV show that they had in that game? Like when you turned on some TVs and you basically got like a Twilight Zone?
I don't remember the name of it, no, but yeah.
Me either.
That would actually, I don't want to know the answer to this, but that would be cool if they, okay, without getting too crazy with spoilers, that if you'll know how to answer this question. Are there any tie-ins at all between Alan Wake and Quantum Break, or is it maybe Easter eggs only?
Easter eggs
okay.
mostly.
So that would have been crazy if like Quantum Break was tied. Like, it was Quantum Break what really happened, and Alan Wake was the show, or Quantum Break was the show within Alan Wake.
Right, because honestly, even when you played, did you play Alan Wake and
American Nightmare?
American Nightmare?
No, I didn't play it. I have it. I didn't play it though.
They're pretty good. I like them a lot. They never really kind of give it like a very good end. Like they never really tie it off.
Well, there's a sequel apparently. No.
Is it?
Or
is
it rumored?
I think it was rumored.
Okay. Yeah. No.
I'd be down for it if it was. Like
Right.
I enjoyed Alan Wake. I had a good time with that.
Yeah,
Even American Nightmare I thought was pretty good. But the thing is, like, you'll see, like, there's more Alan Wake mentions in this game than not, but it's all Easter egg stuff.
Okay.
And the Night Springs shows up only twice on the TV. So, like, you can turn the TV on and, like, you get, like, a Night Spring stuff. But it's, again, like, some voice actors saying some lines. Like, it's never the interesting stuff that Alan Wake had, like the Quantum Suicide. Because, like, again, like, that game came out, like, 8 years ago, but I still remember that. Like, it was an interesting thing. Like, it was a interesting storyline for him to kind of delve into.
I liked Alan Wake. It was fun.
It was good. It was a good time. I had a good time with that game.
Yeah. So I guess to transition into
Let me know what you've been playing.
right. Really just revisiting Ori because Definitive Edition came out a few weeks ago, and I've been replaying it on hard, having a really fun time with that. And
Hard or like the one hit kill difficulty?
no, hard.
True.
The next difficulty is one hit kill. I'm probably not gonna mess with that. That's probably you get touched once and you have to go back to your save or whatever you're at. But speaking of Ori though, we actually have a let's play that we wanna get out there.
Kind of get out there and start letting them know, like right? I mean, you have played the original Ori, when it came out last year.
No, last year, yeah.
Last year.
So
I never played it at all.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I'm interested to see what your views on it are.
Right.
And just to see, because to me, I love the game, and I know you love Metroid, Super Metroid.
Right.
You're totally down with Metroidvania games.
Yep.
And it seems like a game that you probably will like mechanically. So
the thing about the
that's something
game
to look
too,
forward to.
like what always kind of turned me off to it from when I saw it, and like I remember seeing some video footage of it, but it was always the art style that I think never really appealed to me, and it was kind of like a turn off. I know this is like controversial hot take here,
Yeah.
but a lot of people love Rayman and Rayman Legends and Rayman Legends Origins, and I don't like that art style.
I love it.
It doesn't speak to me at all. Like it's too I guess like those games feel very sterile. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't think that it's unattractive to me because it doesn't really come off as like all that impressive. Like I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's so like high def 2D looks so great.
I think the art style just looks beautiful. Just the colors, like in Ori specifically,
right.
You know what people like about Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, how the platforms look like it's part of the world. It had environmental, what's going on in the background of Ori looks amazing, and all your platforms are part of the world itself.
True.
It's not just like not that I have anything wrong with how Mario platformers are, for example, but they're just like floating platforms in the sky.
Right.
Whereas like this feels like a living, breathing environment,
True.
But yeah, I mean, I loved it. I think you'll probably like it though in the end.
I'm down to try it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how I feel about it once it's all done. It's just that the way that I kind of gave it again, like I had never played it. It's just the look of it was really kind of like the main detractor, I think. So I'm very interested in seeing how I kind of come across it. I think 2D graphics in HD can actually be really nice looking, but like when I think about good examples of 2D graphics in HD, like I honestly just don't really think of Rayman Legends or what's that game with the
Shrine?
Is it Shrine? It's
is that
the
this
one with
thing?
the Eskimo and like the last
Never Alone.
something like that.
Yeah, with his wolf.
Yeah, it's the Eskimo and the wolf, and like I know a lot of people when that came out, they were like, "Oh man, that game looks amazing," and I'm like, "Does it?" I don't know. Like it didn't really ever really drive me into that. Like, never really seemed like something I'd wanted to get.
Yeah.
In comparison to something like Cuphead. Like Cuphead, I think
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
that game looks amazing. Like that is when I think of like great 2D graphics because like they're emulating that like 1920s
The hand drawn
yeah.
classic style of cartoons.
Right. That shit looks amazing.
As a side note to that, there's actually platforming stages. It's not gonna just be the boss boss rush
which is
everybody thought it
good
was.
because I remember when they first announced it seemed like it was only gonna be boss rush stuff. So I don't know to what extent they're gonna have the platforming, but I'm interested in having more of that like game, because I thought when it came out I was like, oh, it seems like such a short experience. Does it have a release date?
No, I don't think so. Hopefully we find out more at E3.
True.
It's one of those games where they reveal early on that we don't hear about it.
Right. I feel like we've heard about it like 3 or 4 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
Like
There's a bunch of games where we've heard. Like Below is another one
Right.
on Xbox. Speaking of,
that's true.
yeah. So you want to go into news, I guess, right now?
Yeah.
I have a couple things I want to.
Let's go for it.
All right. So first thing since we're talking about shooters before, I guess let's talk about the news of Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 getting remakes on next gen consoles.
Now
Or
is
Xbox One,
that news or is that because they're out already, aren't they?
All of them are out. I thought they were doing the staggered releases.
Well, 6 came out already. I know that. I'm not too sure about 4 and 5. We can check.
Well, either way,
Sure.
I know since 6 is out, the point I bring it up is that's the one I didn't play. I stopped playing at 5, and 6 is interesting because it has the three characters that you can use. But I'm more open-minded about Resident Evil games. Like 5, I thought was good as an action title, even though it wasn't the survival horror that it started out as, But I don't know. At $20, I think I might have to dive into Resident Evil 6 and give it a shot. Co-op, at least.
I think if you never played it, then that might be a pretty good idea. And honestly, maybe co-op. I think that might be a good time for us to play that together. Wouldn't be the worst.
That's not a bad idea. And expectations are set. Speaking of, we're gonna dive into this later, but my expectations going into it are set at I think where they should be. Where I'm not expecting the greatest survival horror game out of this. What I feel probably a lot of people were expecting.
Right, I definitely agree because that's I think something that had pretty big effect and impact on the way that I remember coming into that game. Is I thought 5 was okay, but again kind of 4 is great. 4 is one of the best Resident Evil games, but also it's so different from Resident Evil, because you started to kind of stray away from zombies in that regard, and you had the Las Plagas, and like they just weren't like your typical zombie type of deal. So like I remember the lead up to 6 kind of being like almost as if it were like a reboot of the series and kind of getting back into
Leon's
zombies.
Story was supposed to be specifically the horror elements of Resident Evil, right?
Right.
So.
Didn't really pan out that way. Like, you know, like again, like a lot of the marketing at that time was kind of like, oh, return to form, getting back into it. What they're doing is they came out with 6, which is out now, 5's coming out in summer, and then 4 is coming out in fall, probably around Halloween.
So how do you feel about that they're releasing backwards?
It seems like they kind of know, like they're like, oh well, we could get 6 out there real quick, and then like maybe 5 we could kind of rush out there too.
As people anticipate the 4.
Right. 4 is the one that probably will get a lot of money coming out around Halloween. People will be like, I could really go for a Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 4 just came out October 27th. Let's go.
That's exactly what they're planning.
You know, that's the exact mindset they have going on for it. Smart marketing on their end.
Yeah.
4 has been out on so many consoles at this point. I think they've ported. And
How many? I mean, they're remaking 2
Yep.
now, which I'll be interested. I want to play that, and
Me
I
too.
want to get into the remake on the Xbox One or PS4, or whatever.
Did you
The
play the
first one.
GameCube one?
Yeah, but
It's
I just-
it's HD now, but it still is that version of the game.
I mean,
True.
it's just I guess there's a sense of like owning it again, you
Sure.
know, and playing through it again.
True.
But
I mean, it definitely looks way better, and that's like, you know, I mean, you haven't really had the opportunity to play it since the Wii. I mean, they ported that to the Wii and they added some motion control stuff, but like, you know, if you wanted to just play it, like you either need the GameCube version. So I mean, it's been generations since you really had the opportunity to play it either way. You know, I think it's a good thing to kind of have that. That's nothing I'm against. 2, I'm again excited for, just like you, just because like it's the first time they've actually said like, yo, we're gonna remake it.
yeah,
Remaking is a pretty big deal. Like there's these ports, you know, and that's what you kind of have to deal with, and all you're doing is just porting it to a new system, and that's kind of not too exciting for me. It doesn't really get me interested in playing it again.
doesn't get your jollies jingled.
Nope. Resident Evil's in a weird space, I think, overall, just
Yeah.
because the last couple games haven't been too hot on my end. I didn't like Revelations either. Wasn't too big on that.
Parts 1 and 2, right? It was 2
All
parts
of
to
them.
that.
Oh, it was like episodic, so I think it went up to 4
4 parts?
episodes, 5 episodes.
Oh,
It was under 6. I
Yeah.
want to say it was either 4 or 5, and I didn't quite like it so much. No, it was an interesting experiment that I think they tried to kind of split it like that, but yeah, wasn't that great. I thought the original Revelations was okay, but
Yeah.
okay, you know, like I used to kind of be a lot more into Resident Evil.
I think didn't the first one have positive reception to it? The first episode, that it was more of a return to what people wanted from Resident Evil,
somewhat.
or is that me conflating it with like hopes of what?
Well,
people want?
Revelations had a lot, and I think that there was a lot of potential you saw in one.
Mhm.
But as it went on, so the way that it kind of worked out is that you had different characters' perspectives,
Mhm.
and as it went on, so like I'm trying to remember the characters. You had Barry's daughter, and you had Claire.
I think so.
I think Claire Kennedy, and you had a couple other characters. I want to say what's his name from Resident Evil 0, the prisoner. I can't remember.
Facts don't
Whatever.
matter.
It's all right. Exactly. But you had all these characters, and they were on an island, and eventually you started retreading some of those places you visited, because maybe you went, you saw a place, and then like later on, you know, Claire comes, and then she's in this place, and like you have to deal somewhat with some of the aftermath of some of the stuff you dealt with,
Mhm.
but for the most part, you were just going into the same environments again, and it got very repetitive very quickly, and then some of them just weren't really fun. So like you're in an environment you don't like, and now you got to go and redo that environment again. So like it kind of, I think as you started, you might have been a little bit more optimistic about it, but as it kind of went on, it was a little bit more of like a,
Like trucking through it.
yeah,
Yeah.
wasn't really feeling it.
Another remake that's coming out is Turok 1 and 2
Oh.
for Xbox One.
As a bundle or?
There's not too many details on it yet,
Mm-hmm.
but as I say this, I don't know if it's coming, if they announced PS4 plans,
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
but you would assume,
I would think
probably,
so.
yeah. But I mean, me personally, I love Turok 1 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
and to
Used
see,
to play it all the time back in the day.
yep, and to see that they're
Cerebral
getting
bore.
remade on current gen consoles
Mm-hmm.
gets me so excited. So excited. I love the feeling you get from remember the first time you played Turok and then the fog?
Right.
That was more like a technical thing.
Exactly.
But it really did add to the atmosphere.
It did, definitely.
But I mean, granted, it's probably not gonna be like that now when we play it.
I would hope not.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
it's gonna be fun to revisit regardless. And then specifically though, Turok 2, Seeds of Evil most likely will have online. Because if it's based on like the PC port that came out a while back, then that had server browsers and whatnot.
So did they come out with just a port of 2, or did they port 1 also on PC?
That number 1 recently came out.
Right.
I don't know if it was this year or the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it got the remake,
True.
the re-release or whatever.
True.
So looking forward to play that again.
Definitely. I think that could be very exciting. I haven't really played it since the N64.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe on, like, I've thrown it up, like, once or twice since then, but, like, I don't think it's been... It must have been over a decade since I played it.
I have not played. The weapons in that game
It was so interesting.
are amazing.
Yeah.
They're so diverse.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I feel that creativity is kind of lost
Right.
on a large scale these days because, you know, obviously you still have your games that are doing unique things.
Mm-hmm.
Like Prey is another game that came out like several years ago on the 360 where it had some unique guns.
Yeah.
You know,
Prey had, like,
you could shoot little creatures that explode.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't know. I can't really recall games that had things like the cerebral bore. You know?
Yeah, they're really, I can't think of any either. It hasn't really been like that because there's been just the move, I think, towards realism in general. Yeah. And you kind of lose those things. I think that's one of the very interesting aspects of, like, something like Prey, because overall I didn't think Prey was that great of a game.
Yeah, it wasn't received well.
Right.
Yeah.
But Prey was also, like, a game that was basically flat out from the 90s. Like, it was a heavily delayed game, if I remember correctly, and then eventually came out, like, early on in the Xbox 360's life, maybe 2007 or so. But that was a game that had a pretty long...
It wasn't a launch title?
It might have been launch window. I don't know if it was launch title. It was either I think it was 06 or 07. It was early in the...
No, for sure it was early.
Yeah, but I don't remember if it came out before or after Gears. But either way, like, it was a game that feels like a relic from that time period. Like, there really isn't anything like that anymore. And that in and alone of itself is a very interesting thing, you know, because, like, I really enjoy those games. You can't have all realism all the time, you know?
No, for sure. I like the Talon, the melee weapon. You had it all in that game. You had the cool Talon Claw as the melee weapon, or the Razor Wind. Remember that weapon? It was just like a saw, like a blade that you threw, like the Predator disc, you know?
I remember that.
And then it bounced around, cut people up. It had the it was in the first one. I don't know if it was in the second one, but well, they both had their own versions of it. The nuke.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that shit?
I remember that one.
I love that game. I just want to ride a Triceratops mounted with rockets and miniguns.
I got a couple games on Steam that you can do something similar. They might not be as good, but you know what it is,
the
too?
music was good, too.
Oh, hell yeah. You know? And it was a time period, too, where you had arena shooters. And I miss arena shooters. Because right now, there's the Unreal Tournament, obviously, and you have a couple of them online. But arena shooters kind of don't really exist like that anymore, you know?
It's a shame. It's a shame too, because really the only thing holding the torch right now is Quake Live maybe and Halo. You know, other than that, Doom's coming out, which is actually segue into that.
Mm-hmm.
The beta is I think this week, and this is the weekend of betas.
Yeah.
Well, it was closed though. It was
true.
for people who got Wolfenstein, I believe.
Yeah, so I was able to play it a little bit, or rather, I downloaded it and I think I turned it on, and I think that was all I did because I was so busy.
But as far as like the gameplay fundamentals of arena shooters, it still has some elements there. But how are you gonna have Doom with perks and loadouts?
How you gonna have Doom with like melee kills? Like, you know what I mean? Like, Doom is a fast game. Like, it really like
it definitely feels a little slowed down. You know, I feel like the same thing with, to draw a comparison to Halo.
Right.
Halo 3, for example, it felt like you were running in mud.
Right.
And for this, I haven't played it myself, so maybe it's a thing where you're watching videos where you're controlling it, maybe it feels different.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that either way,
like
even if you were controlling Doom, I think it would still feel that way. I think it's a problem with just trying to modernize the game. Like, you know, like they're sitting here and they're like, well, how can we make a Doom game in 2016? What is it that people are playing? Whereas instead they should be playing to their strengths. Like, yo, we're Doom. Like, we're just gonna come through and be Doom. Like, that's like kind of all we need to really be. We don't need to go so far into adapting in that way, you know?
And what's interesting though about that is that the people who made the multiplayer is Certain Affinity, and they helped create Halo maps and helped with design of Halo multiplayer over the years.
Oh, yeah.
And the lead of Certain Affinity, the head of it is Max Hoberman, who was like back since like Halo 1, used to be a lead multiplayer designer for Halo.
Right.
And it was because of him that Halo kept its roots in arena shooter, in arena style, where like everybody starts off equal.
Right.
Because originally Halo 2 was supposed to be designed as like a game that's more large scale, like a Battlefield kind of game, you know?
True.
But he was like, people loved the arena shooter style of Halo 1, so we got to continue that focus for Halo 2. And long story short, like he was the guy that was pushing for that.
Right.
But to see him and his company now change the freaking godfather of arena games, although like Doom, maybe we're like getting a little too ahead of ourselves because Doom was mostly known for a single player, and they say that's still in like people love Doom. It'll still be like that.
Depends. I mean, like you said, definitely it was, but I have pretty good memories of like being on like 14K and like playing with my brother and my cousin on Doom and like Duke Nukem too, like making stages and stuff, like maps and levels and stuff, and trading it. Like I had a pretty good time playing that with online, but again, it definitely was in a time period where it came out was a single player game.
Right.
But I feel like the single player in this still seems more like Doom 3, which I think time has been pretty kind to. But I remember when Doom 3 came out, a lot of people were against, and like my memory of it, like it's been a while since I played it, but I still don't really think Doom 3 is that great, like in comparison to
I think that's
like
probably
Doom
the
1,
general
Doom 2.
consensus, or that it's just too different from what Doom was.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big change, and that's again speaks to the time period, because when Doom 2 came out, it was 90s, like it was just the aesthetic and the feel and the vibe of that time was one thing, and when he came out into Doom 3, when that came out in mid-aughts, kind of we're moving a little bit more towards atmospheric stuff, and a little bit more in that area. And now the new Doom comes out. Is it really that much of a surprise that it has perks and that it has loadouts? Because at this point, so does everything else, you know what I mean? And like that's unfortunate as fuck.
For definitely from the outside,
Right.
it's a total surprise.
Definitely.
Even from the inside, because what I'm gonna bring up right now is the thing with Max Hoberman, Certain Affinity, and whatnot.
Exactly.
Is you as people who know who is creating the Doom multiplayer and the people behind it, the last thing you would expect is the Call of Duty-ization quotes of Doom.
Right.
And when I first saw multiplayer footage of it, and I saw people spawning with rockets, and the only because they still have some of the fundamentals there where you have to fight for power-ups, which are like demon runes and like more health and shield and whatnot, but there's no weapons on the map.
Double-bladed shotgun?
Well, they have it, but you spawn with
shotgun?
it. You spawn with
That
it.
sucks.
It's not something that you have to go and fight over, which is funny with Halo because Halo 4 lost all of that.
Right.
And it was a game about perks and customizing your loadout and kill streaks and whatnot. And Halo 5 was like, you know what, we're going back to our roots. The people want arena shooter style for fundamentals, and the Doom did the opposite.
Right.
So it's just...
So give me a little bit more like background information on Max. Like, is it the first game that his company has really kind of been involved with?
No, they've made Age of Booty. You ever played that?
Yes.
They made that. No, I mean, he
So this
knows
is like the
his shit.
first like really big thing they've been involved with, though, right?
They helped with Master Chief Collection,
Okay.
Halo 2 Anniversary. I think they made they like were mostly responsible for that. So like in similar scales, they've done things like that because they didn't work on the single player.
Right, because what I was
So
trying
on
to
a
get
similar
was
scale,
like that they're trying to, like, I guess like the focus is like when it's not your company.
Yeah.
I guess like your point of view is like, well, obviously I want to be more true to the arena shooters, but when it's your company and like you are making now a big deal game, it's like, well, I need to make something that sells, because I also now need to make my company more viable. I think there's like a little bit more of a personal attachment to it. Not to say that he
Like your
wasn't
stake
attached
should
to
change. You're saying,
right?
No, I hear you. Yeah.
Because now this is mine. This is the thing that I own. It has my name on it. Like, whereas beforehand, like you probably would have needed to look into like, oh, Max has this sort of relation to it. Otherwise, beforehand, you're probably just attributing it to Bungie or to Capcom for Age of Booty or whatever. Like, you weren't really directly attributing like his expertise to it, but now this is this man's company, and like it's a little bit more focused on the things of which he's doing, you know?
Because I don't know if they're because I don't know if they're gonna be promoted or marketed as being behind the multiplayer. I think it's only.
I think probably not. It'll still be Bethesda,
right.
But I think that like you kind of said, at this point you're getting a little bit more involved with like it being your baby and trying to get work, or I guess the best way to put it would be to secure future work.
Yeah.
So like now you're coming out with a big thing and it's a little bit more known. Like Master Chief Collection probably I think might have been a similar deal, where I think just like his thought process might have changed over the course of like when he worked on Halo 2 a decade ago for Bungie, and like how it is since he started on Age of Booty, formulating.
Well, even Halo 2 Anniversary was most recent.
That was the most one. Well, what was the first one he did? Like you said, Halo 1, right?
Yeah.
Because at that point he was an employee, but now at this point he's the employer. Like he has ownership of this thing, and he wants to kind of.
No, he was back then he was the employee, but in Halo 1 it was like a small team. There was only 2 people that worked on the multiplayer, and he was throughout Bungie he was like lead positions. You know what I mean? So he always had autonomy.
But it was still like Bungie.
No, I hear you saying. Right. Yeah, as representative of the company.
I don't know what the name of the company is. You said it before, but
Certain
like
Affinity, yeah.
Right. So it might as well be called the Max Company. You know what I mean? Like at this point, like it's a little bit more tied to his identity, I think. So he really wants it to be successful, because like once Doom, people really love the Doom multiplayer, people are going to be like, oh, I need someone to make my multiplayer component, let's go to Certain Affinity and get them in on it, and then it'll secure more jobs for them in the future.
You know, it's also just interesting to think about how this plays into our topic of this episode,
right? Setting
expectations, because there's still one thing I want to talk about before we dive into all that. But you know, setting expectations. What are people going to go into Doom expecting multiplayer to be like? You know, are they even going to have it on their mind, or are they going to only focus on single player? What are the takeaways going to be from it, the reception and whatnot?
It's true. But
to play into another game before we transition into that beta this weekend is Gears of War 4.
Right.
And
actually, even before Gears of War, do we want to jump right into that in betas, or do we want to talk about, or do we want to do like a little rumor section? So actually, while this is happening, some hot news dropped.
Let's do it.
Some hot rooms.
Get it out there.
And then we'll talk about Gears.
Yeah. That's good.
There's a lot of NX rumors out there.
Okay.
Might be something worth bringing out there. You know, rumors are rumors. Who knows if anything's going to come out of it. But it seems like they're coming from some fairly credible sources. So the first thing that I'm seeing is really it's saying that with the NX, the power of it, rumor right here seems to be. So I guess just even say what's coming
stronger than the PS4.
Right. Like certain amount beforehand, and the question being then like would it be as powerful as the PlayStation 4.5, which seems to be a lot of people, again, only rumors, but seems to be very heavily backed up at this point. That could be an interesting thing to kind of see what would happen, because right now PlayStation 4.5, a lot of people are kind of treating it like a little iterative update, like there wouldn't be too many games that were specifically designed for it. But it would seem, though, if that were to be the case, that there would be a console out there that would have that sort of capabilities in general.
Right.
I can see maybe being a little bit more of an impactful change, you know? Graphics, though, and power being what it is, that's a whole separate story. The more interesting thing to me, personally, is the fact that there are 4 ports. Rumor.
Yeah.
But they're saying that there are 4 ports, and they're saying Zelda, Smash, Mario Maker, and Splatoon. And that's an interesting thing to think of because of a couple of reasons, actually. Like, I mean, the Wii U controller, fairly unique, has a touchscreen on it. You know, it's kind of its jam, its bread and butter.
And part of the rumor was also how there would be a shared screen experience of some sort, right? If it wasn't already tied into the controller itself.
Right.
So that's like an interesting thing to kind of consider, because right now we know nothing about the NX. We probably won't know until E3 or around that time period.
Yeah. It's like Smash and Zelda, I guess, don't really sound too surprising because, you know, I guess people were expecting that anyway, especially with how Twilight Princess was handled.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
no,
Smash is in regards to like controls, because I really don't know what the controls are going to be. Like, I'm just saying, like, in general, like, we've had Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, and, like, generally speaking, like, they've made pretty good use of, like, the gyroscope and the touchscreen in terms of menu and map, actually, especially for Twilight Princess when it's all up on there, and just kind of ease of use, because then, I mean, Zelda games in general, like there's a lot of, you only have 3 spots, so once you have to do a lot of stuff, and the management of your items can get a little bit, crazy and excessive. But if you have a touchscreen and you can just drag something and do it, it becomes so much faster, and you can do it on the fly. You never have to pause gameplay.
Have you used any games that utilize the smart glass for Xbox?
It works for Zombies.
Yeah, I was actually gonna bring that one up. It works surprisingly well. In Plants vs Zombies, the specific way you use that is the second screen is a boss mode, that what they call it, and then what they're doing is giving live reinforcements in the form of like health pots or healing stations or whatnot, or just different things, like as the battle's happening live. So I thought it was pretty interesting. So to see that maybe if this rumor is true, where it's a second screen experience, I could totally see that working for something like Zelda, where you pop up like a Nintendo app. Right. And then your menu management is right there. You just have your phone next to you or your iPad or whatnot. So I think it makes sense for that.
You know what I think, actually, I just kind of thought of this now, would be a little bit interesting to think of, is because the general concept that we kind of all associate with the NX is that it's both a portable and a handheld in general, right?
Yeah.
So what if you were to take, like, in the situation we're at now, you came over to my house and you had your portable NX, and I still had my controller, NX controller, but you were able to use your portable version of the NX as a second screen for you.
That's interesting too.
Right? Because then I could still have mine with my screen and my experience or whatever. Then you had your little portable version of it, and then that became a second screen experience. Because when I think second screen experience, I'm a little bit more like, did you play Metal Gear Solid yet? Metal Gear Solid 5?
No.
So like they had like the Metal Gear Solid app, and it hardly ever worked, but you can like sit there and you can call in like supply drops, and then like you can look for things, and it had like a whole bunch of options that you can really utilize. Something similar to how you said Plants vs Zombies had it. But like when it's base functionality like that, like who knows to what degree the portable is going to be different, or to like who knows what aspects a portable would have in terms of the NX. But conceivably, if it's something that's a little bit more base compared to the console, then that would be something I think you can easily do on a second screen.
Yeah.
All you really need at that point is just the screen.
All these NX rumors and talk is getting me so damn excited.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting E3 to see what happens between that, whatever other console stuff might get released in regards to hardware.
Yeah. You think the rumors of the NX, a different question. Do you think that it may hurt the NX if it's weaker than the next PlayStation?
Good question.
The upgrade?
I think, that actually kind of ties
into perception is reality and all that. And then
exactly.
You see some fans see, another weak Nintendo console.
Exactly. That's kind of the issue.
Dismiss it right there.
Like, it kind of ties into what we're saying, too. Like, I still want to talk about Gears 4, bring it into it, but just to kind of give, again, like a little bit prime the pump here. Interesting thing to think of, because at this point, I think that it's really hurt Nintendo overall to have the nebulous NX over their head for the last year, because they had to announce it early, unofficially at a fiscal meeting, because they were like, we're making smartphone games.
Yeah.
So before, people were like, oh man, they're going out of the hardware business, they're like, no, we're still coming out with hardware. And I think in the long run, they've kind of had to deal with that in terms of, in a lot of areas. I think that the perception of new hardware coming and that construal has kind of been an issue for them going forward since then, because a lot of people were really kind of looking at it and like, well, should I pick up a Wii U now? How much is it going to affect the Wii U? And like a lot of just perceptions.
That balancing act of, do I invest in it now with what they have, or just wait until it all comes?
Right. So now you have this expectation, and again, like we're talking here, like the NX is a console. And I mean, rumors are saying whatever they're saying, but truth of the matter is we know nothing about the Wii U. It could be a fucking like...
You mean NX?
The NX, yeah. I mean, well, we know nothing about the Wii U either. It's the hardware that's out there, and I'm looking at right now. But we know nothing about the NX. Right. It could be literally anything. Like we're sitting here like, oh, it's supposed to be a portable, like, like they've married the portable and the console. We don't know that. So to what degree is someone going to be disappointed because it just ends up being your run-of-the-mill console?
It's so funny, those controller rumors that turned out to be fake.
Right.
You saw the multiple stages of accepting and the stages of grieving.
Right.
People were immediately they hated it, but then some people grew to like it even, or accept
Denial,
it.
Anger, bargaining, acceptance.
Yeah. And some people just, all right, just, you know what, I'm not even going to buy the NX. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's tough, to market your product and make sure you present it in a way that's attractive to people.
The widest audience in general,
Yeah.
And to some degree too, you have to deal with the fact that just people are against you and from the get go.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of people when they saw that were just like, hell yeah, that's something I can make fun of. It looks like a football, even though like
I thought of Hey Arnold or Stewie.
it was some of the images you saw too. It was kind of funny. Like at the end of the day, it's more of a funny thing, but it's also kind of crazy to think about how widespread that stuff got.
Spreads
and
like wildfire.
It was all over the place. Like there were websites that were reporting it as if like, yo, like this is real. Because at this point now you have high-end computers, you have 3D printers, you have just the fact. I mean, like if you thought about
Trust no one.
Exactly. It's hard. Like
For sure.
It's a weird thing, Because you would look at it and you'd say, oh, well, it has that sticker, or like there's smudges on it. It's like, yeah, but like it's so easy now to doctor legitimate fake.
After this, I feel like we can't trust anything.
Nah.
But it'll happen again. It always does.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's. I think at a certain point you need to have rationality kind of come to bear, because if you look at that and you saw it, it looks so much like the patent. It also didn't have a D-pad. And like there were so many reasons to be like, no, I'm pretty sure that's bullshit.
Yeah.
But like it was just like the fact that not one person came out, but then another person came out, and it was two separate sources. Like I was like, oh, maybe this has some like.
And the second picture,
Yep, it's a 2016 problem, man. It's a current gen modern problem that we would never really conceive of being an issue last hardware revision, really.
Yeah. So to transition into Gears, I guess, and continue this train of expectations.
Right,
and,
we're talking
and
about the marketing and stuff.
So the Gears 4 beta is this weekend, but did you see the footage actually that was leaked of the multiplayer?
No.
There's like 15 minutes of multiplayer footage, and it seems like this may actually be a beta in the word beta.
Oh, really?
Because you know how nowadays a lot of people promote beta as just like a marketing ploy to get your thing next month. If you're gonna have a beta, your game's not gonna release next month.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it could be an actual beta that they're using to help with the game design, since it's like several months down the line.
That could be interesting.
But either way, to play into the expectations thing, like Gears Ultimate Edition, graphically it was pretty good, and it was 60 frames per second the multiplayer, which looked great. But this footage looked very bare bones and lacking. And
this is a game that's coming out as of this recording 6 months from now.
Right. So it's interesting to see how people are actually taking that. Some people are taking it in the worst way possible, where it's like, wow, this game looks even worse than Gears 1 on the 360 back then, or something,
I gotta see this footage.
Yeah, it is like the textures look very bare, But it's just crazy to see how people are ready to dismiss it just from some leaked beta footage.
True. I wonder too to what other degree there's other stuff that's affecting that, because doesn't it also come with I don't remember who at Epic made the statement about like when they started giving some story detail. I think
Probably Rod Ferguson, maybe
it might have been. I am not too sure exactly, but facts don't matter.
Nah, they don't.
He's
a head honcho though.
Right now they don't. This is a weird thing, because like our thing is
they
facts
always
don't matter,
but they don't matter.
Right. But this podcast they kind of do. You know what I mean? Because like we're talking about topics and like. Factuality does kind of matter at that point. So, like, facts don't matter except for in the GamePod. In the GamePod, facts matter somewhat, like 80%.
Right.
We'll fact check to a degree.
And if you have anything you want to fact check us on, let us know. We'll have a discussion about it.
Open to it. Let's go.
always learning. Always learning.
Interesting thing about the discussion, just before we even get into that, actually, is we do plan on revisiting some of these things. We'd love to get input. So, like, if you want to get in contact with us, or even to, like, guest or talk about it, or, like, send an email with a question, or, like, some information that you have as a listener, definitely email it to us at the ixiclub@gmail.com just to let us know, and then we can kind of, work from there to actually address it. We're definitely open to that sort of thing. We want that to happen.
Yeah.
But hot off the heels of all this Gears of War stuff comes where they're saying, like, oh, well, this game is now going to be 25 years in the future from Gears 3. You're playing as Marcus' son.
And there was a new trailer. You saw that recently? Tomorrow it's called.
Where is that the same one that is a commercial?
It shows Marcus in the trailer.
I saw him in the commercial.
It was during the Fear the Walking Dead. They played
it was the same one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Okay.
But that's the thing, though, is because I'm remembering that's the last thing that I saw. And the last thing that I saw before that, like, because I haven't really been following Gears that much to that degree, because the way that I operate with these things is I see enough to know that I'm interested, and then I kind of like remove myself from the situation.
Right.
Again, as we'll get into with expectations, it kind of helps.
Well, we're transitioning into it. It's all relative.
Exactly.
Anyway,
But what happens with that is when I remember the showing those original footage and like the original like input and like the way that they kind of sold it was that it was going to be removed from the Gears storyline. Like, I didn't know if it was necessarily like a new planet or like a new, but like it all seemed like they were basically using the Gears name, but like it was more or less a reboot. Like it wouldn't be tied to any other continuity.
Oh, you took the initial marketing as like they're detaching from the history they said already with Gears?
Right. And then like it seemed like they kind of even addressed that within like the way that they were talking about it, because when he goes in there and it's framed in this really odd way where it's more or less saying that like we kind of were going to go in a whole new direction with it, but it was easier to just go and like make it a sequel. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just like I want to see if I can pull up the statement.
Well, while you do that, then I'll talk about with Rod, because he made a big deal about as their first game with the studio is that they need to focus on getting Gears right first. And then once you iron out what is Gears, what would you define as Gears gameplay, that feeling you get from it, they want to nail all that first. That might be more just tied into how the game plays more than like the story direction or artistic direction or what have you. So maybe it seems like more to what you're saying. Maybe they are like this is their opportunity to detach a bit, even though he's still Marcus's son. But the fact that we're getting new enemies, even though they're like similar to the Locust, they're called the Swarm.
Right, but they seem very similar to the Locust.
It's basically pretty much the Locust, you know. But I mean, it seems like their plans going into the design of Gears 4 is to get what people love about Gears first, and then go from there. So,
which I mean is fair to a degree. I mean, like it certainly makes sense to kind of like try to capture the feeling of the games and kind of harken back to that.
Because to more on that is Rod specifically brought up 343 and when they took over the Halo franchise, how which is funny because the comparison he drew was Halo 4, how they had to get the feel of Halo first right, which I feel was a bad comparison because Halo 4 was actually the game that did everything opposite of what people wanted out of Halo. But you know, he was more talking along the lines of studio coming in to take over this established franchise, and we got to make sure our first game feels good,
right?
And it has an identity that's in line with what people have come to learn, love, and appreciate from Gears.
True. I mean, I'm trying to find it right now, and like it's a little difficult. I'd rather just move on with it. But like, I feel like that might have been what they were trying to get at. Yeah. But I just remember being a little bit more poorly worded with it, kind of seeming more like addressing the fact that this sort of needed to be something, or like originally came off as being something a little bit more different, and then it just ends up being a little bit more related to.
It was probably along the lines of not just continuing with Marcus as one, and also straying away from what 2 and 3 and Judgment built up.
Right.
How it wasn't like, because that first one was more.
It had more of like a
different vibe to it. It was darker.
Like even the the Krill.
The Krill was a little more scarier, you know, right. Where like the later games just got the catchphrase of Gears. Right. The catchphrase of Gears games are bigger, better, and more badass. Right. You know, that Cliff Bleszinski always liked to put out there. But it seems like this is going back to what Gears
think
1
of
was.
With the Halo 4 comparison, actually, because do more people like to harken back to Gears 1? Is that what more people associate with the Gears franchise? Because Gears 2 and 3, like I think most people associate.
In terms of campaign, I'm saying.
But even campaign-wise, do most people like think of Gears 1 as the definitive Gears experience? Because I think overall, like campaign and multiplayer, I feel like most people kind of generally say 2 is a little bit
the favorite.
Yeah.
Well, it's just I don't know as far as like comparisons or whatnot. But just being involved with that community, it seems like the general consensus is that for future Gears, that they would like the campaign to focus more on an intimate scale instead of like at the end of, I think it was Gears 3, which was the one at the end where you're just shooting the hammer of dawn into the big Lambit
Was that Judgment?
Berserker, or no, or whatever. I can't remember.
I want to say it was Judgment. So, I guess like that's the problem is so many of these gears kind of run together at some point.
Yeah.
Like I feel like the more intimate stuff was something they tried actually in Judgment because that was one that had.
Well, I don't think honestly, I don't even think many people even played Judgment.
Oh,
so that's probably part of that issue.
That's true.
A lot of people wrote it off at that point, which is sad because it did some interesting things.
Right.
But
it's true. It was in a weird position though because it was like when it came out and the position it was in and like it being like a weird interim type game,
Yeah.
I had enough fun with it and like I think they did right by Coltrane. I think because that's the game that I think did a lot of personal stories of Coltrane. Like he kind of had it when he was a little bit younger, coming out of the whatever the football equivalent was, murder ball,
Thrash Ball.
Thrash Ball.
Yeah.
It was a little bit interesting to kind of see that. I think in a lot of other ways they kind of bungled stuff, but I remember that and Baird, both of them kind of were a little bit more focused on in that game.
Yeah, yeah.
So I can kind of see them saying that, but maybe they don't want to make the comparison to Judgment because a lot of people
They don't. That's what the thing is. They said that they were going off of Gears 3 as the base because again, I mean, this is the focus of this discussion is the expectations,
Exactly.
Is that you don't want to put something out there that was the thing that left a bad taste in people's mouths.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there were some interesting things from Judgment, that's not what you want to market it with.
Exactly.
So that's why they're going along with it's starting off as Gears 3 as the base, and we're going to push forward from there, But the interesting thing with Judgment is I feel this expectations thing is like people went into Judgment expecting something, and they changed. And I agree that some of the things they changed were for the worst. Like it wasn't a battle in the multiplayer. It wasn't a battle of cogs versus locusts anymore. It was just humans versus humans,
right?
Which is terrible. But they did add some interesting elements like overrun mode, where you get to control. It was humans controlling the locusts, and versus human controlled beasts. I mean players,
right? Which is actually super interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
I thought that was a really cool thing.
Some of the weapons were cool, like the Markska, which Gears was more like a intimate, like close encounters kind of game where you roll around with a shotgun, get up close with your chainsaw, where it wasn't really long range battles. Right. But with Gears Judgment, it was more rifle based and ranged with like the Markska, which was a really good weapon.
Mm-hmm.
I love that weapon. I would love to see it, but I'm not expecting it. So I don't know. More into the thing with the expectations. It's just sad how like people can't separate themselves from what they really want out of whatever future product they're getting,
right? And
realistically, like what it's gonna be designed as,
right? Which ends up being like a big part of the problem is because like so much of it ends up being like this whole hype machine that you kind of have at a certain point. And when you sit in these aspects when you're talking about things like Gears 3 and like you kind of said you want to associate with the thing that has the positive connotation, but to a certain degree too, like you have to wonder in what other things have an effect on it, because even if you try to associate it with that, to what degree is it that you can actively do that, and that's I think where some of the reaction kind of comes is if you have you kind of see this sometimes with Call of Duty actually, where it's never the Call of Duty that just came out that kind of has the negative impact. It's the next game that you kind of see it. So like a lot of people were down on Ghosts, and if I remember correctly, like Ghosts sold pretty well, but then you started seeing the decline in the game that came out after Ghosts, because that's when people were like, was that Advanced Warfighter? Advanced Warfare.
Yeah. Warfighter, yeah, no.
I keep doing the GRAW thing.
GRAW.
Always.
Which was a decent game.
I love that game. GRAW was ill.
Yeah.
The last one they came out with the future, with the Kinect stuff.
I think that was Advanced Warfighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was garbage, though.
But
back to the point, though, is like when you get to that point where even though Advanced Warfare, I think, was probably, like, a lot of people now will probably say it was one of the best games that they've come out with in recent years, but a lot of people didn't really give it a shot because it didn't have the Modern Warfare or the Black Ops or the like Call of Duty 5 or what. It didn't have the pedigree. It was the start of a new like iteration of it, and it also came directly off one of the worst the franchise has ever been. So you started getting a little bit of negative impact from that.
So it's along the lines of to draw another comparison, Assassin's Creed. Unity was a glitchy mess, and then it's along the lines of a yearly cycle, that franchise.
Right.
And then by the time Syndicate came out, I feel like people were just tired of it, and they were unwilling to even give it a chance, even though it made a lot of improvements from the previous game,
Oh, definitely. And that's kind of one of the interesting things to think of is, like, I don't know if you've read a lot of the reviews and even kind of the things like people have said about it since then, is it's an interesting angle to think of, because a lot of people, when they were saying positive things about it, at the core of it, it was still like it's more or less a return to form. Like, it wasn't that it was a great game in and of itself, but it was more like in comparison to Unity, which was like a fucking garbage fire. You had this game that was actually a little bit like, a competent game. And that in and of itself was something that was novel, kind of going off of that. Right. So there's some way that expectations can even work out to your benefit, because in other words, I think people would have been more down on Syndicate if it came out and Unity was something that was just aggressively mediocre. Mm-hmm. But when you come out with something like Syndicate, which is just really okay, because the last game was utter trash, it elevates this game.
There's definitely a correlation, I feel, between the level of expectations you set. If it's low, and you go into it, then there's a high probability that you'll probably be impressed with it in the end. Whereas the flip side is probably true too, where it's you go in with high expectations. The only room you have to go down is falling below that.
Exactly. I think it needs to be a certain point where it needs to, like, there's a threshold that I think needs to get hit.
That balance.
Because, like, if you look at the comparison we even just made between Ghost and Unity, Unity was absolute garbage fire, whereas Ghost was really just kind of like getting long in the tooth, and it was really more mediocre. Yeah. So, like, if you kind of make the comparison between that, but like if you turned on Call of Duty Ghosts and like the game crashed and like all of a sudden like no one had their face and they just had hair and eyes and like it was all like all this other nonsense happening with the game.
Some of the best glitches.
Right. And then this one came out like when Advanced Warfare comes out and all of a sudden like, oh, I can see that guy's face.
Yeah.
Oh, the game runs? Like that would be all you need. And
it actually works. Right. Oh my God, best game.
Oh, best game. 7 out of 7. Let's go.
One of the things though with expectations, that to go into how it works against the design of the game though, is it's sad though, because a game like Unity, right, we say that it's a garbage fire or whatnot, but really like there were some interesting things to it. Like the 4-player co-op I thought was so fun, where I would love if that was like maybe the focus of the next Assassin's Creed again, except that it wasn't as glitchy, obviously. But just the fact that you were able to coordinate assassinations with your friends, that was a whole new level of, like, I played the first Assassin's Creed and a couple, like Assassin's Creed 3 a little bit. I played a little bit of the multiplayer.
Right.
But I was never invested in the franchise like that up until Unity, when it was like, wow, you got some co-op, I can play with my friends. I'm all about that kind of experience. But the thing is that it was so bad.
And now it's associated with something that's
it's
so
associated
bad
with that the expectations are already there, and like anything cool that they added to it, they can't even, like,
it's
a lot of developers,
well.
They don't even want to touch it again.
Right.
Which is along the lines of what we said with Gears, with like the interesting things from Judgment.
Right.
But no, they're completely disassociating themselves with that brand.
They have to, like, I think, rebrand it as like a whole new name or something, because like the concept itself is toxic. So like instead of calling it like, co-op missions for Unity and Assassin's Creed Egypt or whatever the next one that they're coming out with is, they'll sit there and they'll say, all right, so let's not call it co-op missions, let's call them like Creed missions, or like Creed crew missions, or like something like that.
You listening to this, Ubisoft?
I'm in there. I'm tapped into the
this is it
in the meetings. Getting you to 411. That's what I'm here for. This is your espionage moment. But like that's the way you kind of handle that sort of thing at that point, is just give it some time, back it away, couple years down, rebrand it as a new thing, put it out there, and people be like, yeah, this is great, totally new, novel concept. They won't remember Judgment just because no one really thinks about Judgment in that degree anymore. So
it's interesting that I think we're both glad that Assassin's Creed is taking this year off to get their shit.
Absolutely. I think
the shit together.
It's beneficial. That's another thing too, though, is because the expectation of it when it becomes a yearly franchise is, that's, I think, what kind of worked so much against Unity was, you started to get long in the tooth, but you also expect there to be some degree of competency there. And if you can't meet that, then you kind of have to sit back there and you're like, then this thing needs to take a break. Right. Because there's no real need for it to be a yearly franchise, other than the fact that, like, the corporation would like to continue to make money off of it on a yearly deal, and we want to keep reiterating on it. It's an easier way for the developers to make some money off of it. Like, you have a baseline as opposed to creating a whole new IP. Instead, you have like a world to kind of build off of, and ideally, a installed user base because people are fans of Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the benefits you have of a franchise. But then you get into a point where, you know, you don't really need a new one each year. So I'm glad that they were able to sit there and say, hey, let's take some time off. Because
Take a step back for
a lot of people don't do that. You don't get that from franchises often.
Yeah.
You know,
what I find fascinating about Call of Duty's approach to that, though, is that it's not the same studios working on it.
They have 3 studios, I think,
right,
now
which
working
is which is interesting to me because it keeps the fans of that franchise excited for the new game.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they've gotten, or maybe they're not fully there yet, but they're getting to a place where fans are now understanding of it's a different studio this year.
Mm-hmm.
Then hopefully maybe expectations will be set accordingly. But even though it's not fully there, hopefully Call of Duty, if any of those annual franchises,
Mm-hmm.
they're probably the ones that are taking the proper steps to getting to that balance.
Right, because I think that's the way you have to do it, is you have to kind of have multiple teams working on it and them all bringing their own fresh ideas to it.
Sure.
Because you basically have, like, I don't know who's associated with what at this point, but you have one that's making the Black Ops, one that's making the Modern Warfare, one that's making, Advanced Warfare. Like, they're all kind of doing their own thing. But that also creates its own thing in regards to expectations, is because there are certain things that are done in one that are not done in the other. So, like, if you're a fan of, like, zombies, I mean, this year's installment may not have zombies. It might have something equivalent, but there are certain, like, engine and game things. So I think that, like, it's a smart move and it's a good way to go in terms of giving it to multiple developers, and this way kind of keeping things fresher. But it works against you when you sit there and you're not able to coalesce and collaborate with one another to make something that, okay, so this base function is always going to be there. We're thinking about adding this thing. Maybe that's something that we can start incorporating into your game now, so that when your game comes out after ours, people aren't saying, like, hey, where's this one feature? Because that's the issue that I think they kind of run into. And then that is something that starts biting themselves in the ass too, because now the expectation is, oh, this game has this base feature, the next game is going to have that, right? The next game comes out, doesn't. There's
definitely still that confusion out there of that people don't necessarily even know who's behind what. They just see Call of Duty every year. I'm going to go buy it. Oh, why does it not have zombies this year?
Right. And then the alternative is end up at a certain point, people are just like, you know what? I'm not a fan of Call of Duty. I'm a fan of Modern Warfare. I'm a fan of Black Ops. I'm only going to get the new Black Ops. You know,
it would be interesting to know the sales figures on that. You know, like the analysis of, like, if people from this part of Call of Duty really dive into this subset or whatnot.
I think so too. It'd be really interesting to know. I can only give anecdotes. I know a lot of people that if they were to announce Modern Warfare 4 this year, they would be like, hell yeah, I'm getting back into Call of Duty. But they also haven't bought a Call of Duty in the last 3 games. So, like,
it's Infinity Ward, I think, this year.
Right. So it might be Modern Warfare 4. But, like, that's kind of
Or Ghost 2.
Could be. That's the rumor, actually, right?
Damn.
That's what I heard.
Well, to stem away from Call of Duty for a second, let's talk about Titanfall, the teaser that was just dropped recently. Now, what if Titanfall 2, because it's supposed to be revealed at E3.
Right.
So talking along the lines of these expectations and influence on design, what if this game doesn't have a campaign after the issues that people were raising from the first one? Oh, this game would be amazing if it had a campaign. And people are now expecting, after all the commotion that was brought up during that time, that the second one absolutely will have a campaign.
Exactly.
Even though we don't know nothing about it.
Yeah, because there's nothing that's said about it. I mean, I didn't see the trailer yet, but I know that people are saying that there's swords and stuff in it now.
Yeah, it was just a Titan that came in at the end with like a Buster Sword.
Right.
It was pretty cool.
I mean, it sounds cool, and also that now it's also coming to PS4.
Right.
Which is pretty big news, I suppose. But, like, you know, I think we all kind of knew that, though.
That was an expectation.
That was gonna be.
I mean, again, expectations. You know? So,
that's true.
But they did say as much, though, that the next one would definitely be
this won't be exclusive, but the next one, I think it's going to be multi-platform. But, like, you bring up, of course, a really big point is because, like, you would think now, when did Titanfall come out? 2013? 2014? So, like, it's been 3 years about.
No, 14 in the spring.
Okay.
Because Xbox One came out.
Right, that's right. So it's been 2 years about since it came out. Like, you know, we don't know what day it's coming out. We can assume probably if it's coming out this year or the fall, but we'll know about it in 2 months.
I think according to the fiscal review or whatnot, it's somewhere between the fall and spring.
Right.
Of the next year.
So, you know, we have the release, like, kind of impending, right? It's been long enough since it happens, and now that kind of builds up because, you know, you don't know how long they've been working on this game.
Right.
So to sit there and say, like, they should have campaign, it's like, well, from one aspect of it, like you said, that was the main complaint. So you'd want to say, yeah, that's something they address. But you have no real reason going into that based upon the trailer that they said, whether or not that's going to be something that they actually have.
Right.
And that's something I think is a little bit more interesting to talk about, too, is the fact that we're 2 months out from E3, and they're already announcing an announcement. You know, so to what degree is it that the developers are kind of feeding into that? Because like it's something that may end up biting themselves in the ass if it doesn't have campaign. But to what degree is it that they're just happy people out there talking about Titanfall 2?
Yeah.
Because right now people would only be doing it at E3. It would just be, oh, it's a big E3 thing or whatever. There might be some other stuff happening at E3 that like kind of overshines and overtakes it and whatnot, but I think a lot of people will kind of be more willing to sit there and say like, oh, well, Titanfall 2 is just announced, here's bullet point A, bullet point B, talking point, like, you know, whatever media thing we want to get across. But if you kind of put it out there now when no one else is talking about anything, you can let the fan base and the community talk about things and start getting that expectation and start getting hyped and start being like, oh, well, now what are they going to tell me in E3? Okay, and then like it's all part of this cycle that you have, the media marketing cycle that at certain points is just getting earlier and earlier, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy to even think about the fact that Gears of War had a TV spot, you know? It was during the Fear the Walking Dead, the premiere, they had a commercial, and it was straight up a commercial. Like, it didn't have a release date. It didn't say, like, beta coming soon. Like, it said nothing. It was just, like, Gears of War 4, and then it was, like, on the Xbox One. So, like, people could really be going out there right now, being like, oh, I want to play the new Gears of War. And then what are they going to get? The Ultimate Edition? Like, I mean, like, they're going to be kind of like, oh, well, that game isn't coming out until this holiday, October 30th. Yeah. So it starts building that marketing perception that people have, and it's like, well, that kind of, you know, it's a thing to think about, which is how much of it, like, if you were a person that was sitting there kind of excited now to play Gears of War 4, would you go out, would you buy the Xbox One now? Like, to what detriment does it have on that person? Because you might sit there and say, you know what, I'll come back October. So, like, to what degree is it that you're doing things so early, you know? Because there's announcement, but then there's, like, running something and getting mainstream appeal, you know? Like, that might be a little bit too early to start doing something like that.
Yeah. To give, Fallout 4 is a good example of the opposite of that.
Exactly.
Where, I think the marketing was spot on, where it was shown, it was revealed at E3, right?
Yep.
And then it came out, like, a few months later, and it was ready to go.
Fallout 4 is, like, a weird thing, because it's, like, the game industry's worst secret. Because I think for, like, the last 3 E3s is where people were like, oh, you're going to hear about Fallout 4. And then it didn't happen. And then it was like, oh, you're going to hear about Fallout 4. And then, like, I think this year was the year where it was like, if they don't mention Fallout 4, Fallout 4 is not happening. Yeah. And then that's when they did it. And then it was like, oh, it's coming out in a couple months. I wanted to talk about that because, in my opinion, that's the way to go. Yeah, you come out with something and you announce within 6 months. But it's the announcement of it. Because, I mean, we knew, quote unquote, Fallout 4 was coming.
And
but
we
they
knew
didn't
Titanfall was coming.
Announce it until it's coming out.
Well,
you know
we knew Gears was coming, and
but that's what I'm saying. That's the difference, because Gears was really shown at last year's E3, so the marketing kind of started really last E3.
Right.
Because the reveal in and of itself has really been at this point.
I don't think it should have been at.
Right. I think it's way too early.
Right.
You know, and that's when you run into something like, think about last year's E3 when we saw Final Fantasy VII, we saw Shenmue 3, and like some of those games were like legitimately theoretical. Shenmue 3 was a Kickstarter. Yeah. There was no game yet. So, like, the fact that, like, to go up on a big stage and be like, yeah, we're going to come out with Shenmue 3, and it's like, are you? Because, like, there's no game yet. So, like, it's an announcement of an intention.
That's funny. That's what Nintendo did with Brawl. Like, before even Sakurai knew of it, but this was, you know, several years ago. This has always been a thing in the industry. And
exactly.
And it works against a lot of games.
And it's been something that's happening so much more frequently, though.
Yeah,
you know, and I'm starting to see a movement in the other direction from certain companies. But like when you think of something like that, like it's such a smart play to do for Fallout 4, because you start getting them excited right now, and then you can keep that momentum going, and then 6 months later the game is out. You know, you're not really worried about kind of drawing it out, and you're not letting it get to a point where it reaches its fever pitch that ends up backfiring against you. You know, one of the things that happened with Far Cry Primal that I was excited for was that game was literally announced like 4 or 5 months before it came out.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate that it was an iterative game, but I was excited to see a big company like Ubisoft go out there and be like, hey, in this February, we're coming out with a new Far Cry. I kind of had a feeling when it came out that I took that to be like a vote of like a lack of confidence from Ubisoft, where they didn't really believe in the game, and that's why it didn't have much of a marketing cycle.
Right, it can play against it even too.
Which kind of, again, goes into the whole point. Like, when you talk about it and you say, it's like, well, why isn't this something that they're pushing and announcing like years in advance? Because the general rule of thumb, the heuristic is you announce something at E3, and then it's maybe out at the end of the year, or you kind of do an announcement. It's like, oh, this is going to be a marquee title. It's coming out next year. Expect it next spring or something like that. And you start building the hype and you start doing all this marketing for it. But when you see something that ends up being like, oh, well, we're announcing this, it's coming out in 6 months, people kind of sit there and it's like, oh, that must be like a B tier game. It's not a AAA title.
And price also plays into that, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Definitely. But like, I don't know if you saw with Paper Mario when they announced the new one for the Wii U. They said that that's coming out pretty much between now and the end of the year. I don't think they had a concrete date. But Nintendo's been pretty consistent with this sort of thing, where they've been announcing games a couple months beforehand. So like,
are you talking specifically with like 3DS games?
3DS and Wii U. I mean, there's certain ones that have slipped,
Zelda.
obviously, like Zelda, and there's Star Fox that weren't intended to be. But you come out with certain things where, like, all of a sudden, here's a Twilight Princess Picross, or even Wii U, where they announced Twilight Princess HD, and it was like 2 months before it came out.
Yeah.
Same thing with Majora's Mask 3D. It's like, oh, well, that game's coming out February, and also here's a new 3DS.
Talk about revisiting, like we did earlier. This will be amazing topic to revisit around the E3 when Nintendo comes out with the NX to reveal it. And then if they talk about games that are coming right down the pipeline for fall only, or if they talk about games down the future. Because me personally, like, they can talk about games down the future, but not, that shouldn't be the focus, which I feel always has been for like a majority of companies.
Right, but see, that's exactly the thing, though. Like, it's definitely, I think, is something that we should kind of do, like, expectations and like part 2, whatever, during E3 time.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's something interesting to think about, is because hardware is such a different ballgame. Because there's 2 aspects of it, I think, honestly, that are kind of like worth mentioning here, which is that people right now, they'll say, and they'll be like, all right, so what's coming out for the Wii U? They'll say Star Fox, they'll say Zelda, and they'll say, I don't know what else. 6 months down the line, Nintendo's going to come out there, and they'll probably be like, oh, we're coming out with, like, if 6 months ago, you would have been able to sit there, it's like, oh, well, Star Fox coming out in Zelda and Twilight Princess, I don't know what else. But now you can sit there after that direct, and you're like, okay, so they're coming out with Pokken, they're coming out with a new Paper Mario, they're coming out with Zelda still, Star Fox is still coming out. Because of the short cycle, it's kind of been like, well, here's our announcement of the thing and when it's coming out, but at the same time, if you're someone that sits there and you look at the calendar, you're like, oh, it's an anemic calendar. For hardware, becomes this different ballgame where, like, I can see why a hardware manufacturer, especially for the launch of one, because when you're coming out there and you want to entice people into buying it and just kind of saying, like, oh, this thing has life, you need to kind of go out there and say, okay, these are things that are going to be out there day one. These are going to be things that are kind of out there within the window, just to ensure that, like, you're going to buy this thing come September, October, November, December, more than likely November. You'll be playing games well into spring. You won't be dealing with these 18 games for the whole year, Well,
to be fair, can't that concept be really applied throughout it? Because they're always trying to sell consoles to new people.
Right.
I guess it more. I think it more goes into along the lines of how they market it.
Right.
It's like if they just, like, I think what was a good idea was how 343 announced Halo. They never announced it as a Halo 5. When they first announced it, I remember we had this whole thing, but they never did.
They came out there. See, that's.
But anyway, even to stray away from that, just the concept of if you're saying, all right, your favorite franchise known for this brand it'll come out. Like, for example, if the NX, if there's no in-launch window about a new 3D Mario game, but say if they say, don't worry, we have ideas for a new 3D Mario or whatever, please be excited. Like, I'll be fine with that.
But that would bother me, though.
I can totally understand.
Because it's a given. You know what I mean? So
is it though?
I think so. Because if you come out
we didn't
there
get one
and you
for
say,
for the Wii U though.
Sure, we had 3D World.
No, but I mean, along what I specifically said about like a specific game in a franchise, you know.
If you were to say a Mario game is coming out for the Wii U, I mean, they could have said that, and technically we got like 4 of them. Because we had Mario 3D World, we had
the
Mario
launch
Maker.
Speaking of which, New Super Mario Bros. U was a phenomenal game, I thought.
I think so. I love that game. I didn't get a lot of love at all, but like, you know, I think it's a fantastic game.
Yeah.
But like the thing that kind of like bothers me about the Halo 5 thing specifically is that if you say something like that and then it's like, oh, well, I never said Halo 5, but it's like you had every sort of thing about context otherwise indicated that this is going to be the next mainstay of the franchise. And for all intents and purposes,
but Master Chief
Guardians
in a poncho was never.
But when you show that, that's what it was. It wasn't just a tech demo. It wasn't like they didn't.
This is the thing. It's like perception is reality, really. Like they weren't
exactly, but they're playing upon that perception to kind of trick you. That's why it feels like the wolves pulled over my eyes, is because they sat there and they're like, oh well, we showed this thing, but it never said the words Halo 5 Guardians on it, so that could be something that's technically not the same. But it's like when you did that and you put it on stage, and you might have said some stuff like off the cuff or whatever, but you know that eyes are on the stage. That's where eyes are.
I don't know. We're gonna have to go back to the tapes because I'm pretty sure they made it in that announcement.
We could. I think we should. But like, you know, if you go there,
no, the general point is totally true.
Right? Because if you go in there, that makes you feel like it's going to be the next thing. And if they came out there with NX and they're like, we guarantee you there will be a Mario game on the NX, I'd be like, like, I mean, that's not really enough. That's an announcement of announcement. I mean, there's a difference between something like a Final Fantasy VII announcement, which is like something that I guarantee, you know, they're doing episodic structure of, so we might see some capacity of it within the next 2 years.
Which even actually plays into the whole influence thing. Did that thing start off as an episodic thing because maybe they announced it way too soon, and then they were like, wow, we're not going to be able to complete this game. We have nothing right now. We won't be able to complete it for like 7 years.
Right.
So let's just design it differently.
Let's get something out there so that we can put people at ease and kind of get them. And like that, that's when it becomes the issue. I think if you're going to sell a system, of course, as like a manufacturer, you are always trying to sell more units, and that's why you do things like these Shenmue 3 and these Final Fantasy 7 announcements and these announcements of games that end up never coming out. Like, I don't know if you remember when the PS3 came out, there was like this one game that had a trailer of where like a dude was shooting out the side of a car, and like there was like a gas tanker that like flipped over, and there was like all these dudes, and it was like a game that never came out. It was by Sony London, like the London studios. And there was like, when you look at some of the stuff that they kind of said was coming out in that window, none of it, like there was at least 2 of them never came into fruition. But it plays into this aspect of course, you want to kind of show it there's some life to it, but, you know...
It's about that balance.
Exactly. You got to kind of find somewhere in between it to kind of lead off on.
For sure.
And I think that, like, I would be at a point where I don't expect them to actually have launch titles at E3 for NX. I think they'll probably say, these are some of the things that we're making. And you'll probably see Mario or Zelda or whatever.
Mario 128?
Maybe. I would be down for that, you know? I'd be cool with that.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, I think that as you kind of, like, you know, they'll say, oh, the NX is coming out in November or whatever, or early next year or whatever it is. And then in September or so is when you get more concrete information on actual launch titles. It's the goal to, of course, get all these things out there. But I think that there's an expectation where it would be something out soon. Something out within the near future. In comparison to something like Final Fantasy 13 Versus, that goes through so many reiterations that it's now Final Fantasy 15.
When was it that we heard about that anyway?
10 years ago.
It was 10?
10 years
Jesus.
ago. Before Final Fantasy 13 came out, they had this brilliant idea to do the Nova Crystallis thing, and it was supposed to be Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy Type O, and like Final Fantasy Versus. And then they came out with Final Fantasy 13-2, Final Fantasy 13-3, Final Fantasy 14, and now all of a sudden, like finally, September 30th, Final Fantasy 13 Versus will be out as Final Fantasy 15. Also, we're making a movie and an anime because we don't learn.
As a tangent, real quick though,
right.
10 years ago, damn, that's crazy. But
long time.
Sunshine came out 14 years ago, and Mario 64 came out 20 years ago.
Right.
So we haven't really gotten that kind of Mario game for such a long time.
To an extent. I mean...
there's no to an extent. Galaxy's not
saying,
those kinds of games.
But
I love Galaxy, don't get me wrong.
It's the modern version of those games.
No, I hear you.
I think I would love if they came out with Mario 64 2 or Mario 128. Awesome. And
just think about the environments with like in Mario Kart 8, how beautiful that game looks.
Oh hell yeah!
Exploring that as Mario.
Right, but like at the same time too, like if we would sit there and we'd love collectathons, but if someone else came out with a collectathon now in 2016, 2017,
you got to think about the finances.
Exactly, because that's the issue. Like when you think about something like Galaxy, you get a lot. Like that's the really brilliant thing about Galaxy is because it's like a microcosm of a galaxy, and you get like all these different areas within one, so you get to see all these different environments, and it's all within like the egg galaxy or whatever. So you go to one place and there's a house, and you have like all these like physics of this planet, and like that's what's so crazy and awesome about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the extent to which you're kind of like taking the idea of the 3D platformer Mario, and even then you're taking the collectathon aspect because you are getting stars. Or in that point, was it Shine? It wasn't Shines in that one. There were still stars, right?
What, the stars? Yeah.
Yeah, you were collecting stars still.
Yeah. But it would be interesting if they combine those concepts, 64 style with Galaxy elements.
I think so. I mean, it could be. It could be interesting.
I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. We can go into Mario design. But again, that even plays into the influence, like expectations of a new Mario game.
Right.
Where it relates to how much money it's going to make. Does that influence the design of it? Do they go with 3D big open exploration Mario, or do they go with something that maybe did financially better like Galaxy? I don't know. Offhand, I don't know what did better really.
So that's the thing, exactly, because I know a lot of people when for Wii U they came out with 3D World and even Land for the 3DS. People were like, yo, what the fuck is this? They didn't realize that the 2D games, the new Super Mario Brothers games, they sold way more than Galaxy did.
Don't all the 2D games sell better than?
They sell way more. And it is a part of the conception and construal aspect of where people are sitting there and are saying, well, this is a 3D game that just in general looks more complicated. Or it's just that like there are mechanics and like syntax and whatever of a 2D Mario game that you just kind of know because you might be someone that has played those games before.
Yeah.
So you have things like the flag, and you have things where it's a little bit more side-scrolly, and it's a little bit more like self-contained, and I think a lot of people respond to that. So they came up with the Land concept, which was a marriage of those two concepts to kind of bridge people from the new Super Mario Brothers games into something a little bit more like Galaxy. So it's kind of the in-between between the two. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting thing to really think of because that is the exact thing they're doing there is like, so what can we do to combine these user bases? There are people that will only play one but won't play the other. So if we can put out a product that can get them to like get a little bit more comfortable with a 3D game, then we can take those 20 million people, and instead of having only 10 million sales for Galaxy, maybe we can get 15 million, and we can kind of find some happy medium in between.
Graduate some of those people from one experience to the other.
It's a scaffolding process. So you start building them off, and then from there you go into the next one.
It's there's things that you can play in the short term for sure, as far as games development or entertainment in general.
Right.
But there's also that consideration of the long game. You know,
exactly.
Grooming people to how you want them to view your product and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting thing to talk about, honestly, is because when you think about something like that, it's a hard thing for you to really do, is to say, like, this is something that I would love, but in the grand scheme of things, how many people like me are there? You know, and you have to think about those things where you're thinking about graduating a movement and all those to kind of get people acclimated to a genre. And it might be something that is basic for you, but if it's something that gets the community invigorated on the whole, that can only be better. You know, I think you see a lot of that with fighting games where you have like people that kind of get uptight about the addition of practice and challenges and trials, and they're never perfect. You know, the game is always fluid and evolving, and there's always stuff going on that if you came up with a trial when the game comes out, it's going to be different as people play it. But it's a better start than having to go to like event hubs and Shoryuken. You know, like you don't really want to say, if you want to get
competent at this game, or like even competitive or casually competitive, you never want to say like, go to this outside source. You want to at least provide them with something, you know,
within the product itself.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that.
And it, you know, a lot of this has to deal with also the marketing machine and what the companies, how they promote it from the get-go, and what image that they're giving out there, and what expectations that they're hopefully trying to set up for the fans that they're trying to capture. Something to talk about the marketing machine that immediately comes to mind is Brutal Legend. Remember how that game was marketed, and that game was completely different than what people were seeing.
Expectations you would have had from that.
Yeah,
you know, that ends up being the issue, right? Is because if you go into it, and if every sort of time that you saw the game, you had like,
you saw the specific thing, you're gonna go into it expecting, hoping that you get that experience that you're seeing, and then when you actually get your hands on with it and it's anything but that,
right?
Then that more than likely leads to that person's disappointment, especially if they can't detach themselves from their expectations and whether or not they understand what goes into game design.
Right, which is a very important part to talk about, I think, is that we can sit here and we can say something like, well, as a fan, I would like them to do this, and I would like them to do that, but there's so many realities of the designer, not just of games, but of all products, what you're making it, where you need to reach a certain base before you are able to really devote the time to it, you know? You can't go out there and say, like, I'm going to make this one thing that would appease this one niche. You need to be able to say it's going to have some sort of broad appeal. There are certainly companies out there that are able to, like, cater to the needs of certain people and certain niches, but to expect bigger companies to do that is a little bit out of touch with reality. It ends up being an issue because you can't really expect someone to pour $1 billion into one product and then say, you know, I'm going to put $1 billion into this. I only fully expect it to reach 10% of the market. You know, you kind of want it to be a little bit higher than that.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to sink that much money.
You're trying to reach as far as you can.
Exactly. You know, from there, we can even talk about, in regards to reach, like, there are certain aspects that we just don't know as fans too, because like we can sit here and say there's obviously the marketing machine and there are certain like bullet points and everything is segmented in terms of by this date we'll talk about this particular piece of information, by this date we'll talk about this, so on and so forth. But for the most part, those things are really kind of figured out long in advance. So we can sit here, and even if the company is fully transparent, we might say, why are they doing this? They should change it. But those are things that went into the planning process long ago. Like, right. Those are things that are just kind of part of the process now.
Right, and that's something very much worth considering, because as a fan of something, you gotta consider the developers or the company's perspective of how much of it is really reliant on the fans understanding how the marketing machine works, which is a whole a thing that we've been touching upon, is how much of developers should really leave it up to people to understand this after for so many years.
Right. How
these things work, how much resources are actually put into game design, how much is considered early on,
right.
How much they how the plans are set going forward, and strategies that are like strict that they abide to going forward.
Things you could possibly change on the fly.
So many layers to this that gaming has been around for a while. It's still an early industry, really.
Right.
But after this time, it's interesting to think like how much of it should be left on the fans that they should know these things by now.
Right, because I'll always be a little bit more like between consumer and corporate.
For sure.
I think you should be a little bit more consumer friendly.
It's good to have that perspective, like to not even, you don't have to work in the industry,
right? But
just as long as like you understand and can acknowledge or appreciate how things work, how gears move.
Right.
Then you're already better off than someone who's ignorant on any of this.
Exactly, because what it helps you do is it helps you engage in it smartly. You know, I think a lot of people can very easily get kind of caught up in the hype. You know, they can get a little bit caught up into it, and a lot of it becomes a sunk cost fallacy situation where you get so invested in it so heavily that by the time it comes out, you really need to be validated by this thing because you have spent so much of your time
being invested in it, you couldn't really conceive of it being something that's disappointing or something that doesn't really fit or align with what you're looking for. So you kind of run into an issue there. But if you don't engage with it to that degree, if you're not sitting there hitting all the marketing points, if you're not watching every new trailer for Civil War, if you're not watching every Batman trailer, you know, if you're watching no trailers, you're only seeing one, you know, like you're just kind of saying, okay, I've seen enough, and then you disengage at a certain point, that benefits you. You know, you end up, I think, enjoying more products overall that way. And it's not really a matter of saying that, like, I know too much about it going into it. That's certainly something that takes some sort of precedence. But it's more like just not getting so close to it to the point where you can't really remove yourself from it. You know, you don't want to run into that sort of thing.
And to go more on to piggyback on the topic of feeding into the hype machine, you and me personally, to draw an example, is like Batman vs. Superman. We didn't watch any of the trailers.
Nope.
We knew, all right, this is a movie that we want to see. We're interested in these characters. I'm ready to go. And we went afterwards, after we saw the movie, we were both left that theater very positive on it.
Right.
But the negative reception was frankly overwhelming, where like we went, well, how can these people have, like, people saying that there were no motives for these characters when we were easily describing them? That made sense. And it was just interesting how when we went back to look at the marketing behind this movie, they literally gave you everything. And that's the problem with marketing these days, is that I don't feel like a lot of these companies are finding that balance of, are we revealing too much? Should we be? The question of even should we? Whereas, like, do we even need to? Because if we show that X character does this thing in a trailer, is it really going to warrant X amount of people to come and see the movie, netting us more money in the end?
Right.
You know, it just seems like everything, maybe they're focusing too much on the bottom line when they don't really need to, because the products that they're working on are big enough within themselves that they don't need to be spoiling everything in a movie.
Exactly, because it comes to a point where I think the audience in general kind of sits there and they're like, oh, well, I need to watch, and I'm compelled to watch every form of marketing and every piece of marketing.
The power of marketing compels you.
Yeah, it's like, I must watch this thing. I must engage with the machine.
It's strong, though. I mean, we know how it is. Like, you want to be part of it's the zeitgeist again. You want to be part of it, but it's about that balance, you know? As long, I feel, we said this already, like, as long as you can detach yourself from these expectations which we all naturally set within ourselves, but you can't, there's a balance to be struck there where you can't really judge a book by, I don't want to say it's cover, but you know what I'm saying.
Exactly.
It's not, because you don't want to judge it just solely on its marketing, setting your expectations, and then when you actually read the story, then it's something different that you get, and it's like, damn, I hated this.
I think it's like, it's okay to not know everything about something before going into it.
For sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like, you know, removed from the spoiler situation. It's not a question of spoilers. That's a whole nother topic that I'm sure we'll eventually get to talking about.
So many.
But it's really just, when you're sitting here, you just need to say at a certain point, it's like, oh, I know enough. Okay, that's it. And you'll feel so much better about things. Like, it changes your outlook on it, because at a certain point then you're not really construing it to be what you need it to be. You're not molding it to fit whatever schema you have to kind of say it needs to be this certain thing that I've developed and devoted so much time to. You know, you bring up the Superman thing, but, like, you know, while we're talking about other trailers, like, you know, we're sitting even in situations where I don't think we were sitting there with the X-Men trailer because we didn't want it spoiled. We were just like, yeah, I know enough about this. Let's talk while this is on.
Already. Yeah.
You know? And that's a certain thing to think about, too. It's not to say, like, blindly just say, oh, it's a balance, again. You know, you don't want to sit there and say, okay, so, you know, Nintendo's coming out new game, I'm in from the get-go. You don't want to sit there and say, oh, it's a Batman movie, I'm in from the get-go. There should be something and some part of it that sells you on it. There's nothing inherently wrong with being sold on the concept.
Right.
But it's when you devote all this time to it, and, like, when you are only seeking out validity at a certain point. If you don't engage with the machine, you know, one of the common things as we brought up with Batman vs. Superman, was that there's a complaint about the Justice League. And if the marketing, I guess, is the thing that really kind of made people feel that way.
They expected this more to be a Justice League movie.
Right.
And have more of the characters in it.
And, like, there's a lot of, like, expectation of, like, this is going to be the kickoff of the DCU, or the DC Cinematic Universe. And if you just engage with it on its own, as a movie in and of itself, and not with it being like, oh, well, how are they going to create a whole franchise out of this one movie? If this is supposed to be the beginning of the movie, like the franchise, I don't see how this could lead into it. Like, that's a question that you really shouldn't really be taking into consideration, because going into it, that's not how you should engage with it.
So yeah, I mean, I guess the takeaway from that is the whole discussion is that there's a balance that needs to be struck between your expectations that you have set into it, because it's natural. People have expectations for everything going into whatever it is.
People want to be objective, or they want to like go into it and it's like,
everybody wants to have an opinion on something.
You gotta be just subjective. There's natural biases that occur, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure, yeah.
It's how you have them painted by outside sources, and to a degree where you want to say that you engage with something on its own terms.
Yeah. So it's really about the fans acknowledging that within themselves, but also there's a lot of responsibility on the developers or companies or whatever with how they're marketing their product, which they really need to look at. Am I marketing this too early? Am I marketing it in the right way? What expectations am I setting? And then all from that, you got to look at then your design of whatever product you're creating, and is the marketing of it and the fan reception to the marketing and the expectations that are already built up, how much of that is influencing the design of whatever product it is you're creating. And if it is influencing it on a big scale, then you got to analyze that and see, is it something that really we can dial back a bit, or find that balance within the game design or movie design or whatever it is, because you don't want to have something where it's just solely created that you want to match expectations, but because you always want to keep people curious and engaged in something fresh, something new, because you don't want I feel the worst thing for creative products is to release something that everybody knows what they're gonna get, and to just be one and done.
Something that's stale or just kind of fits this thing. It's like, oh well, we should come out with this thing now.
For sure,
it's been a while since we've got one of these. You want there to be some creativity to it and some like point, some like artistic, I guess, quality to it that actually has some merit. I think what it comes down to is just being a smart consumer. And I think that some of it comes from just your natural engagement of it and just your intimate knowledge of the machine as you get from, just your involvement in it. Everyone's going to have their own different perspectives and times in which they want to disengage with it. But I think it's just, as a heuristic, it should just be, I'm going to engage with it to a certain degree and back up. But, there's an aspect, I think, of with the zeitgeist, right, where you want to kind of get involved with something when it comes out. And maybe there's a point where you do engage with it maybe when it comes out. It's going to change per person, I think, and it's a subjective thing. I know when I should remove myself from the situation. Unknown knows when he should remove himself from the situation. And I think that as you get more experience in it, you kind of can suss that out on your own. I think there's a point to really be made, I think, to engaging with something maybe a little bit towards the end of the tail life, which is why I'm so big a proponent of the 6-month cycle. I like I said, really want to be consumer friendly. I really want to put the consumer first as opposed to the company. I'm a little bit more invested in the consumer and their experience, because that's where we honestly lie.
That's who we are, yeah.
And when I think about that, if you have something that's 6 months or so, you're really kind of engaging it with it at that point where you can still get that feeling of engaging in the zeitgeist, and you can still get that feeling of being there to talk about it when it's new and not to have that drop off. But at the same time, too, you're not having it become something so overwhelmingly part of you need it to be a validation piece. So it's the perfect amount of time, I feel, for you to be able to be like, oh, okay, I know this. Oh, it's coming out 2 months from now?
I totally agree.
Great.
6 months 6 months or less seems like a great window to start out with that tease, and then to gradually build. Because the worst thing you want is to build that hype and then for it to just flop over time.
Exactly. It's bad for both parties. It's bad for consumers, it's bad for developers, because then they don't get the sales, and the next thing you know, they feel like there's no faith in the franchise. All of a sudden, you're not getting games in that series anymore, or products, or games, or comics, or whatever entertainment, TV, whatever you're getting. But when it comes down to it, it's just there needs to be a point where, there's an old adage you have where it's like, don't pre-order games. People say it, don't pre-order games.
wait a day or two, get a couple of people to kind of give their takes on it, and then see what happens. And there's a truth to
culture.
that.
That's a whole nother topic we can get into too.
I feel like we will.
We're gonna dive into a lot of things with this GamePod.
You know, I think so.
iXi GamePod.
Do that again.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do something with our voices like synthesized.
That's what it was. I just wanted you to say it. I was like, just we get that clean.
Get some reverb in there or something.
We don't have an intro song yet. Point out. We'll probably put something. But if we have you going, iXi GamePod, then maybe we'll put that in there. You know, it could be it.
A little alien, a little robotic in there.
Yeah, it could be all right.
Flavor.
I could be down with that.
Yeah, enthusiasts, developers, companies, all alike. It's all about that balance.
Definitely.
Life is about that balance.
It's a good way to put it, you know. I think that's a nice little cherry to put on it. Just, you know, it's all about that balance. If that's the point that we want to get across, is just be a smart consumer, keep yourself balanced. Don't get too invested in these certain things to a point where it can have a negative impact.
For sure. And with that, I'm FUNKNOWN.
I'm Asadasa.
You can reach us at iXi Club on Twitter. Mm-hmm. We also have Twitch/iXi Club, YouTube /iXi Club. You can email us at theixiclub@gmail.com.
Right, and like we said earlier, we definitely want to go and revisit a lot of these topics, so we would love to hear from you. Leave comments in the YouTube or email us some comments to, again, theixiclub@gmail.com.
Right.
Or if you have a setup, well, we can definitely do a guest situation. Like, we're kind of open to that. We definitely want to revisit and get some other aspects. If you... I think one of the things that might be interesting is we came off very, pro-consumer. There might be someone that might be a devil's advocate. Maybe
it's always interesting to talk to contrarians.
It is.
You know?
There's benefits to that. You can't go through life only hearing one side. You got to hear the other. And you got to also engage with that other side from good faith. You can't just go into it.
That balance. You know what I mean?
Maybe we should just get you saying that balance, and that's what's going to be.
That'll be like the transition or something.
Yup, that
some
balance.
Sound bit.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that balance. But specifically, if you want to reach Asadasa or myself on Twitter, you can find me at @UnknownIXi.
I am on Twitter at Asadasa.
And until next time, baby.
That's it. Thanks for listening. That's the inaugural GamePod. Done. Wrap
it up.
We do it.
Nice.